So my name is David Bernans. I was at Concordia starting in 1999 and was here until around 2006, 2007. I worked in a lot of different capacities. I have been a part-time professor. For a long time, I was a researcher and archivist for the Concordia Student Union. And I was also a student at a certain point in translation here, and I was president of the Graduate Students Association.
Wonderful. So could you recount the history of the food services at Concordia from the time that you were a student and an employee at Concordia?
Okay, well, when I came here in 1999, 98, 99, it was Sodexo that was the food service provider. They eventually later became Sodexo Marriott. They had a complete monopoly on all food services on campus. If you had an event, you had a speaker come, you wanted to provide them water, you had to order the water through Sodexo to make sure that it was, so you had to pay like $15 or something to have water for the guests that you had on the stage in the H110 or whatever. So you couldn't have a bake sale if you were a student organization without using expensive Sodexo products and then charging even more for them. And of course, there was this organization called the People's Potato that wanted to serve pay-as-you-can food to serve to students, really cheap, healthy food. They couldn't do it on campus because of this monopoly agreement. The only way that we found a way around that was through the Concordia Student Union. Concordia Student Union had space, they had Reggie's, and they had a basement that they weren't using, so the People's Potato was able to serve out of the basement at Reggie's. Unfortunately, there's no kitchen in Reggie's, so the only way to cook the food was to do it at a kitchen outside, off campus. So they found there was a church that allowed them to use their kitchen, so they would cook up all the food at the church, and then they'd have to haul these huge pots of food, really, hot soup going down the sidewalks, public sidewalks, to get to Reggie's basement, and passersby would be, whoa, what's going on here? And so, I had been known to help them from time to time. They needed volunteers to haul these huge, heavy pots of food. It took two hands on each pot to haul it to Reggie's basement. So we'd bring it down to Reggie's basement, and then there'd be these, they'd serve the food. There'd be these long lineups that go all the way from the basement all the way up into Reggie's. And people go down, and as they're going down, there'd be all these interesting conversations. People would be passing out leaflets. So it was a really interesting activist space. And and then the serving would happen down in Reggie's, and there were these old booths and stuff we had down there, and all kinds of artwork. It was really often, there was always music. It was interesting community space, totally non-corporate and a free space. People felt safe to do any kind of activist thing that they wanted to do, and it was great for organizing. It was a really key organizing space to be able to challenge the food monopoly, for one thing. That was in -- that really students fought back against Sodexo through this event called the Cheese-In. It was an event on the mezzanine, happened all day long, where it was people mostly from different student clubs who had nothing necessarily in common with each other, except that they needed to be able to present their food to students on campus through whatever kind of events that they had. And everybody participated in it with the support of the CSU, we've violated this exclusivity agreement through this active civil disobedience of feeding students free food. It was really popular with students, and we were just basically challenging the administration. Okay, if you want to arrest us, arrest us. The CSU is going to pay our court costs. Anybody who gets arrested, they'll have the full support of the CSU. And if you want to do that, do it, because we're not going to stand for this monopoly anymore. And the administration basically had to adjust to that, because it was clearly an untenable situation for them by that point. There was just too much resistance, and so that's how the People's Potato eventually got their space. How the monopoly was a little bit was somewhat adjusted to allow for some more student involvement on campus in terms of food. And the People's Potato got part of the kitchen on the 7th floor of the hall building and was able to serve on the 7th floor of the hall building as well. So it gave them a bit more stability. And then later on, not long after that, there was a fee levy referendum to give the People's Potato a fee levy, so it gave them some financial stability as well. And it really became, from that point on, the People's Potato really became an important part of the Concordia community. And it always, it always remained a really important. It's no longer that cozy little cubbyhole in the basement of Reggie's, which I kind of miss in a way, because it really is a lot different from the rest of Concordia space that exists now, where everything is kind of glassy, and there's glass and steel, and there's the escalators and whatnot, and everything is so shiny, and there's corporate advertising everywhere. It's kind of like a shopping mall, whereas that basement of Reggie's was like a really a much more real space, and it had, like, there's the artwork, there's like the wood, things are a little bit grungy, but still it's clean, but a real activist space. So now there's serving out of the cafeteria in the 7th floor of the hall building. It's still important. There's still like huge lineups of students to get food, and it's a great spot to pass out leaflets and talk to students. But it's not quite the same as it was when it was in the basement of Reggie's. So that was Sodexo. There was a lot of problems with Sodexo, not just the monopoly, but also just this corporation that people hated for a lot of reasons. And because they were involved in the prison industrial complex. They had contracts with the private prison industry. They had contracts with the refugee detention centers and serving occupying armies, the U.S. armies overseas. And it was just not a nice corporation to be dealing with. And so, there were, the Link wrote exposés on it. They invited a speaker to come from an anti-Sodexo campaign, and there was really a lot of anti-Sodexo feeling on campus. So it was really, nobody was really surprised when they did the next, the next call for proposals, and they had another, they chose another food service provider. There was not a big surprise. It was not a big surprise to anybody when okay, it's not Sodexo this time. It's a new corporation. So people were kind of, yay, we got rid of Sodexo. And well, now we have Chartwells. Well, Chartwells is another multinational corporation that has similar kind of contracts with prisons and so on. It's not really any different, and the services they provide are not any better. And more corporate food is being served on campus. They increased the level of corporate involvement on campus by, now we have these Tim Hortons kiosks and whatnot on campus. So it's not, things didn't really change that way. And to make matters worse, the employees that had been working in the kitchen, sharing the kitchen with People's Potato, these Sodexo employees, they were unionized with the Teamsters, and their collective agreement had given them some conditions that were better than a lot of conditions that exist in the food industry generally. Like, mostly you go into the fast food industry, you're making minimum wage. Well, these employees had better than that. They actually had a fairly reasonable contract for and reasonable hourly wages. And they lost all that when Sodexo was gone. Chartwell said, hey, you can work for us, but it's not the same contract, it's not a collective agreement. Your union is gone, and now you can work for us. We'll pay you what we consider to be a fair wage, which is, of course, minimum wage. So there's no way you could support a family on that. So all these long-time employees and the people at People's Potato were they were going crazy over this. They'd shared this kitchen with these people, and they knew them, and they were really upset about it. And they tried to, I remember going and talking to them in the kitchen, and just seeing them in tears. It was a really sad situation, and we tried to organize and fight for these people's rights, but a contract is a contract, and there was not. That was a really bitter pill to swallow to get rid of Sodexo, for sure. And yeah, as I said, I don't think things have really improved with Chartwells.
Great. So even to touch base on another corporation that's had contracts with Concordia, which is Pepsi. They've had quite a history also with students, I guess, because I guess during your time you saw students uprise against Pepsi more than once as well during the signings of Pepsi contracts. Could you recount a history about the Pepsi contract?
Okay. Well, with Pepsi has been here for a really long time. They were here in the 90s as well when I got here. And they're kind of a very visible partner, more visible than Chartwell's because Chartwell, I mean, you see Tim Hortons, you don't see Chartwell's, right? But with Pepsi, I mean, that's their brand, Pepsi, and they want to make Concordia Pepsi University and have students, part of a really big, I think, a really big part of the exclusivity agreement is try to get students to attach themselves to the Pepsi brand, and then they become Pepsi drinkers for life. And so they're involved in organized events like the Concordia Shuffle, you know, a good event that involves physical activity, you know, walking from one Concordia campus, the downtown campus to the Loyola campus, to raise money for a good cause, for the Concordia Foundation, help students. And, you know, they're involved in the recreation athletics, you know, activity, physical activity, and, you know, to associate Pepsi with these great healthy things. Of course, Pepsi is, they make their money by selling a product that is very bad for you, that has been linked to obesity and diabetes. You know, it's really at epidemic levels in North America because of all this liquid sugar that people are getting in products like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. So, you know, they have it's great for them. It's kind of like, you know, you have greenwashing of corporations, you know, oil corporations that say, hey, we're supporting this solar energy project, so don't look at all of our oil. It's the same thing with Pepsi. It's sort of a health washing instead of a greenwashing. And that, you know, so that's been going on for years and years. And another thing that they have is this bottled water that Pepsi was providing on campus in there. And you know, people would have, you know, you'd pay for water, and they didn't have like good water fountains on campus. And so there was this group, Tap Thirst, that was trying to change that. But there were, you know, groups that they weren't just concerned about bottled water. They were concerned about corporations in general, and the whole, they wanted to change a lot about, they wanted to have a non-corporate system of food and drink at Concordia. They didn't want to have Pepsi, they didn't want to have Chartwell's. But one of the issues was this bottled water issue, and they want to have a ban on bottled water. And Concordia gave all these signals that, oh yeah, we're interested, let's talk about it, bottled water, maybe we could have better fountains and so on. And they said, oh, don't worry, we're not going to negotiate any agreement in the meantime. We have to have these discussions, we have consultations, we're going to come up with some solution. In the meantime, the emails were going back and forth. I got the emails through access to information requests years later. But this was around in 2010. I wasn't at Concordia anymore, but I had come back to Concordia in 2010 to do a talk. And at that time, that's sort of when all the shit hit the fan, basically. And they found out that this agreement was signed behind the backs of students that were involved in these negotiations. And people were getting really mad and organizing. And they had sit-ins, they had petitions, eventually had a referendum to call for a bottled water ban, and that actually bottled water ban did come into effect. Interestingly, those emails also that the university was having at the time, we were sending back and forth at the time, they were worried, they wanted to convince students that bottled water was not bad because that's a big part of the contract. And so, you know, they didn't want to lose that part of the contract, but they also realized that maybe they wouldn't be able to convince students. They wanted to have somebody from Nestle's Waters come to talk to students to explain all the great things about bottled water, and how, you know, it's okay, it's a bottle, but we recycle the plastic, so it's not really that bad. You know, I don't know what they would say at that meeting, but they were just trying to convince students that bottled water is not a bad thing. But they were worried that maybe that propaganda wouldn't work, and that students would remain committed. That was one of the phrases in the email. Are they still committed? There's this problem of student commitment to free water, so they actually negotiated in the contract they changed the terms of the contract a bit to have dual responsibility if there's a bottled water ban, because the original contract that they had signed with Pepsi before, if there's any banned product, then the entire cost to Pepsi would be borne by the university. In the contract that they ended up signing, they did have a provision in that contract that allowed, if there was a ban, that the university and the corporation would share the cost of that. So the university was able to somewhat protect itself about, they didn't talk about that in any of their, and so, you know, when the bottled water ban came into effect, it didn't hurt the university's pocketbook as much as it would have had they not negotiated that little aspect of it. So now there is and they said, oh, we work with our corporate partner to change the provisions, and we're working with Pepsi, and now we have these wonderful water fountains and everything's fine. But there's still this issue of this corporation that essentially it's like a cigarette company, you know, like they're selling something that's addictive and it's bad for you. It's causing health problems all over the place. And you know, if the university had cigarette machines on campus and said, you know, here this cigarette company is an important partner of the university, you know, what would people be saying about that? Well, it's kind of a similar situation, but I guess the university doesn't see it that way.
So just to follow up on that, you're talking about emails between the university and Pepsi. So who is involved with these emails? Maybe you could give us some of the details about the emails themselves.
Okay, so the emails, there were emails going back and forth. The most interesting ones were between Marc Gauthier, who was, I think it was the university, I forget his title at the time, he was involved in the university financing, and Michael DeGrappa, who was a VP Services, I guess, at Concordia. Was that his title?
That's a good question, I don't remember offhand.
Okay, anyway, Michael DeGrappa was a vice president at Concordia at the time. And they were talking about the terms of the exclusivity agreement at the same time that they were telling students that there was no exclusivity agreement being negotiated. They were talking about what Pepsi was saying, what they were saying, but yet, you know, officially there was no negotiations going on. So in other words, they were lying to students. Also, they were talking about educating students, because students they had this idea that water should be free, and they had to be educated to learn that no, we should have the option of buying water, and even if it's not really that much of an option, because the drinking fountains are not so available, that's not, the water's not a right. Students had to be sort of educated to understand that water is a legitimate thing to have as a commodity. It shouldn't always be free for students. And there was this problem of student commitment to the idea of free water. And that's the term that they used in the email, is like student commitment, and talking about that as a problem. Are students still committed? So it's sort of interesting to see in their mentality around that issue. Yeah.
Actually, interestingly too, and you alluded to this in the article, could you maybe explain what happened with DeGrappa at Concordia after signing the contract?
Yeah, so it was, the contract was supposed to be signed at the end of October, and Michael DeGrappa was just in his last days as VP here at Concordia. He had a new job that was starting at McGill, and so one of the last things he did before leaving for McGill was he signed this contract that he lied to students about, he said that it didn't exist, and he signed the contract and then he left to go to McGill.
Do you remember the reaction from the students at that point? And maybe you could describe, I guess, what took place?
Okay, well, I know that, I wasn't really on campus that much. You could probably talk to Laura Beach about that, but, or other people that were there at the time. But from what I recall, students were really upset about this. They were talking about suing the university. They were looking at legal options. They held a sit-in there was supposed to be a meeting with Nestle Waters that ended up to explain to them how water should be a commodity, and they were ready to go and sit at that meeting, just because that was part of the whole mutual discussions that were supposed to be going on before any contract was, but once they found out that the contract had to be signed, well, then it's like, okay, no, we're not going to this meeting to hear Nestle's, we're going to just sit there, we're going to do a sit-in, and there was a so that was a sit-in, and then, you know, they had these petitions, they ended up having a referendum for the, at the CSU, they had a student-wide referendum in, not long after that, to call for a ban on bottled water.
Wonderful. So I'm going to bring it back to focus now on the student groups.
Okay.
I know you talked a little bit about this in answering the question about Chartwells and Sodexo Marriott, but I'm wondering if you could recount the history of like other student groups as well. So there was Frigo Vert, which I think started before you were around, but maybe you could talk about its implication with the students from the time that you were around, maybe tied into other student groups that were around basically in food service industries.
Yeah, well, I'm not too much aware of what was going on with the Frigo Vert, because they were already more established by the time I came to Concordia. But again, that was sort of a foothold that healthy food, non-corporate food had on campus was through the Frigo. And I think that people in the Frigo generally supported what the People's Potato was kind of doing, so it sort of helped give them help them establish themselves on campus as well. And I think they sort of, the Frigo and People's Potato we're always in alliance and trying to create to open up more non-corporate space at Concordia for food and a more of a non-corporate community on campus.
And there was another group as well that you're familiar with, is Kusakor, who basically operated Reggie's Bar and rented out to the Java U space. Did they have any involvement in, I guess, this student-run food sector, or how do you feel about
I mean, I guess the basement of Reggie's was the ground zero for People's Potato at the beginning. It was it was space that was owned by a corporation that the student union owned. So that was a good use of that student space to allow the People's Potato to serve out of there. There's also they rented out. Kusakor rented out space to another corporate provider, though, Java U. And I don't know all the ins and outs of how that worked, but as I understand now, that space has become a non-corporate space.
Yeah, it's basically now called the Hive, which is it's a solidarity co-op that was started by the Concordia Food Coalition.
Yeah. I was talking with somebody from the Concordia Food Coalition about that. That's a really interesting development that finally that they're able to use student space and get rid of a corporation that had been occupying it, which is the way it should be.
Definitely, for sure. So I guess maybe within that, how do you see food services operating at Concordia? Like, what would be an ideal food service system? Okay,
well, I don't think corporations really have any place. We don't need them. Students are more than able to work with local food providers, non-corporate providers, to get good, healthy food into the stomachs of students at Concordia and the broader Concordia community. I mean, that's the People's Potato, is not just providing food to students, but people who are in the Concordia community.
So I've heard an argument from the administration basically saying that they don't necessarily see that possibility from the student-run food groups or basically any of the non-major multinationals to provide to resident students. And this seems to be one of their main focus. Could you address maybe that concern?
Well, I mean, I'm not directly involved in the services that these groups provide, but I know if you give them the resources, they can do it. So I have every confidence that that groups like the People's Potato would be able to provide food to residents.
Great. So now stepping back to the People's Potato, I'm trying to look for maybe a motivation as to why they became the People's Potato. So why do you think this group was created, and I guess what kind of needs did it serve at the time?
Okay. Well, it served the needs is students are hungry and they don't have money. So that was obviously a need that was there, and it wasn't being filled by the corporate providers on campus. But beyond that, I think that people that started the People's Potato were people that really wanted to be involved, create a community on campus, and they wanted to create a space that was not a corporate space, that had that allowed people to express themselves and to interact in more of in a non-commodified way.
So then to bring this out to like a bigger picture, so what is the role then of multinational corporations in public services, like at Concordia, for example?
Well, the role that, as it exists now, I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but the role as it exists now, I mean, obviously the corporations are sort of purchasing access to students through these exclusivity agreements and the right to kind of brand students, to get students to adopt their brands, whether it's Pepsi, whether it's any kind of advertising that you have on campus. They're paying for access to students as consumers. But that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. That's what you see on the billboards, what you see on the vending machines at campus. But those are the visible corporations. There's also all these corporations that are involved in research on campus, that are like have partnerships with the university to develop new technologies, and that money that's coming for research, well, it's only coming for research that benefits the bottom line of corporations. So like if you could say find new genes, if you could find new GMOs that will be resistant to pesticides, so you can really flood the crops with pesticides. Well, that's something that a GMO company could really make a lot of money from. So there'll be let's put lots of money into that research. If it's something, well, here are some new organic farming techniques that we could come up with that would help create healthy food, increase productivity of farmers without having to use pesticides. That's something that could be of great social benefit. It could increase food production. It could be, and it could help create healthy food. But there's no way you can commodify it. You can't patent that technology and charge farmers every time they want to use your organic farming techniques. So that's something that research money will never fund. And so that's sort of the relationship we have with corporations right now. They're deciding where we're going to do research, what research is going to get money, and they're making a lot of money from it. I don't think that we should have any relationship with corporations at Concordia. I think that the relationship that multinational corporations should have with any public institution should be an arm's length, very arm's length, in the sense that they should be funding those institutions through a progressive tax system where they pay their fair share of taxes. That tax money is used to do research that's in the public interest and to create curriculum that's in the public interest, which may sometimes be in the interest of a given corporation, but it shouldn't be the corporations that's deciding what is in the public interest, because they don't care what's in the public interest. All they care about is the bottom line, what makes money for their shareholders. That's how they're set up. They're a machine that is designed to maximize shareholder value. That's the only thing that they care about.
Wonderful. So I've asked you a bunch of questions about the food industry, but I don't know if there's anything that you've thought of that maybe I haven't addressed yet. And if there is, then feel free to talk about it. Great. So that's basically all I have.
Okay.
And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for this.